Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and with just over a week to go to agree a trade deal with the EU, or, one day if you believe in deadlines, there's another one tomorrow. Boris Johnson has a choice to make, and he needs to have basically made it already. No deal, deal, or some form of extension. And in this video, I'll be leaving the no deal alone for a moment, even though, of course, there's a strong possibility of this occurring, and focus on the notion that for Boris Johnson, which is easier, deal or extension, assuming he wishes to avoid no deal Brexit at all costs. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So now we're at the sharp end when it comes to Boris Johnson's options. We can't always frame them in terms of what is politically possible, as we have all year, but also what is legally possible. For example, if there were to be the sort of dramatic movement from the EU that Boris Johnson predicts, so he's saying, well, we're not going to agree a deal unless there's a massive movement from the EU. And let's say they were to back down to his masterful negotiating tactics. Well, legal texts then need to be drafted in order to get a robust treaty that both parliaments are able to actually vote on. Now, there is no problem if Boris Johnson folds because the EU worked out their legal texts for their positions ages ago. We've been a little bit more behind on that. In reality, although the EU will be prepared to move a little bit to get a deal, I'm sure, they're not going to back down in the way that the Brexiteers describe. So from a legal point of view, if Boris Johnson has already decided that he'll accept the deal as it essentially exists right now, because there can't be that much extra movement in it, because you then have to redraft the legal text, and that takes longer. And if you want this thing voting on at the end of this year, which is like a week away now, you got to get moving. So legally speaking, a deal is relatively straightforward. I mean, they've still got to consider the time to translate it into a number of languages so that it can be understood across the EU Parliament and the Council for them to approve of. Apparently, this can still be done if we agree to a deal no later than tomorrow. I would have thought that would be really tight. But apparently, they say, well, this is the absolute last time. But then we've seen so many deadlines. And for those who watched Boris Johnson's press conference last night, now, some think in there he sort of indicated that he'd already decided to get a deal. And it centres around this. He was specifically asked the question, you must know by now whether we're going to get a free trade deal. Will we? And he laughed. And then he turned to his cabinet colleague Grant Shapps, away from the monitor with the correspondent on it. And Shapps laughed too. And he didn't give the impression that he was listening to the rest of the question. The correspondent was carrying on talking. I know it sounds like that should have been the end of it, and he should have just asked that one question. And correspondents should do that when you're interviewing, particularly a tricky politician like Boris Johnson. It's been said before, don't ask multiple questions because you just give them an out. Ask one simple question. I know they want to ask lots, but you won't get any. It's like ask several questions, you get no answers. Ask one question, you may get an answer. But he turned away, wasn't listening to the rest of the thing, and he just laughed. And it's, it wasn't a smirk, it wasn't a forced smile, it wasn't a grimace. It was an involuntary laugh, genuine. This would absolutely suggest that he is actually comfortable with that question and therefore the outcome, of Brexit right now. Whether he's right to be comfortable is another matter. But I would say from that response, it looked like he was on secure ground, that he believes that, which means he must have made his choice. And more than that, he believes that choice is a good one for him, which I thought would be odd. Again, I don't want to read too much into a laugh, but I'd have thought, okay, he may have made that decision by now, but there's difficulties both ways. I'd be nervous about whichever outcome, because you agree a deal, you will instantly be accused of selling out by a load of hardcore Brexiteers, including Nigel Farage, who will say no deal Brexit is what we wanted. And Nigel Farage, of course, says that he's aiming to oppose the Conservatives at the next general election. Mind you, he said that last year and then backed out, so we'll see. But if Boris Johnson doesn't agree a deal, then he has to answer for the no deal consequences, which he won't be able to say are a surprise because we've seen the government's own predictions of what would happen. But at any rate, it was clear that Johnson thought that talk of a Brexit deal was a great joke. And so I don't think he's exactly agonising over a decision anymore. It's made. Not only is it made, the fact that he turned to his cabinet colleague means cabinet ministers know what it is as well. And if you think that he couldn't possibly be comfortable with a no deal, then you could take that as evidence that he intends to agree a deal at the last possible moment. And I think that's what some people are doing, whenever that last possible moment is. Tomorrow maybe, who knows. And that would presumably also mean that he has the overwhelming political support in the parliamentary party that he needed. Because otherwise, if he'd have had it before, he would have arranged the deal before. There was no need to get this deal this late on. Yes, he had to look like he was spending most of the year playing hardball. It didn't have to be this late. Making it this late just risked it. At the end of the day, the EU Parliament could have just said it's too late now. They sort of did that and then they backed down on that. They could have just stuck to that and said, no, it is actually too late. Stop it. And I would also say that Boris Johnson will need the support of his cabinet as well. But and that's normally the case. You can't really afford to piss off your cabinet. But on this occasion, it needn't actually be true, because he chose his current cabinet of cretinous clowns because of their rigid loyalty to the hard Brexit cause. In reality, rigid loyalty to either Brexit or their own personal political careers. It didn't actually matter which. Now, he didn't want any internal wrangling going on as Theresa May had in her cabinet. She deliberately set up a cabinet that would be split. A lot of internal wrangling. Boris Johnson can't deal with conflict. We know this from people that are close to him. He hates conflict, doesn't want conflict. So he created a cabinet where there would be none. And as the transition period ends, he no longer needs that. Okay, sure, he still doesn't want the conflict, but he no longer needs the ones rigidly supportive of the hard Brexit, because whatever will have happened with Brexit, whatever he's going to deliver, will have been delivered. In fact, what it could be argued is what he needs is brains. So he's presumably going to plan a clear out anyway. So if there were any cabinet ministers who wanted to be awkward about whatever decision he's made, they could just be the first for the chop. That's not a problem. But let's say he doesn't think he has the political support for a deal, and he absolutely wants to avoid no deal, then I suppose he has two realistic options. One, so let's say he actually intends to step down as Prime Minister next year. Either because he knows he'll be pushed if he doesn't, or because he's genuinely upset that he can't afford a nanny. Then he could just get the deal anyway and bugger the political consequences, because you know what, he's off into the sunset. Secondly, so if he still thinks he's going to be Prime Minister in a year's time, I know, but you never know, he's quite delusional, he could try some form of extension. Now, the extension is an extremely thorny issue, both politically and legally. Now, the important thing to note here is that it's not legally impossible. It's just very, very difficult. It could be argued it's legally unrealistic. People will say, in terms of the legality of it, but the withdrawal agreement had this date on it in June, and now that's set in law. We can't extend it by law. Yeah, but the thing about laws is that if you or I don't like them, tough. But parliaments don't like them. They change them, because that's what parliaments exist for. Creating new laws, abolishing old laws, changing existing laws. However, it's widely agreed that there isn't really time to do this now. Now, I wouldn't have thought it needed much other than a bit of a date change, but nobody is talking about it being a realistic prospect. So, from a legal point of view, an extension would require a workaround, some cunning legal workaround. And it wouldn't be a straightforward extension of the existing treaty, but something that mirrors the same effects, just because of the very short period of time we've got left. Bear in mind that, so we're told that there is time still to implement a free trade agreement running to potentially over 1,000 pages. Now, if there's legally time to pass a treaty of that size, there's time to pass a copy of our transition period treaty as well. The difficulty here really is not in so much the time to pass it as the time to create it. So I was reading an account. I've been reading a few accounts from people who have more than a passing knowledge of this sort of thing. So I was reading an account on the Institute of Government website about the prospects for doing this, and it does point out two major issues that would make extending unrealistic. Not impossible, but unrealistic. The first is that there would need to be some negotiating of the terms of this extension, and that is where the difficulty lies. You know, if you had whatever was the workaround already now, yes, you could get it passed. But given that we don't, that would take negotiating. That's what takes the time. Because this has, unless it's been done behind closed doors, because nobody's been doing this as a backup plan, it's not ready. I mean, remember, the backup plan could have been, if we'd have got to this point a few weeks ago, we absolutely could have just changed the withdrawal. Both in EU law and British law, we could have just changed the date in it. We did that all the time with the Article 50. We changed the date all the time. So that could easily have been done. Now we've just run out of time. The second thing is it would require mutual trust. There's going to be a certain amount to get a workaround that's not really going to be that robust. It's just there to manage a short extension. You'd need a bit of trust on both sides. I'm not really sure the EU trusts Boris Johnson at this point on anything. So although there would be legally possible ways to get some form of extension, even if it's just for a month or two, and the EU Parliament was certainly talking about doing that last week, although that was in relation to getting a deal first, it would probably not happen in time without a lot of political goodwill and determination on both sides. And that is going to be completely lacking. Certainly from Boris Johnson. He doesn't want to be gung-ho about an extension. He'd be very tentative about it. So politically, an extension is more open to attack than a deal as well for Boris Johnson, as well as being more difficult to obtain. So despite calls for an extension, which are quite right, I would have joined those in, although I will have more to say on that potentially tomorrow, maybe later today, we'll see. The reality is that Boris Johnson would find it easier, both legally and politically, to agree a deal than to extend. So in terms of an extension, it's not that it couldn't happen. It's that in terms of path of least resistance, extending has no advantages over just agreeing a deal for Boris Johnson. If it's easier politically and it's easier legally, then the extension doesn't come into it. It's now a question of, has he decided to go for the deal or has he decided to go for the no deal? Now, as a final point, I will just add in here that there could still be an extension, just not one to give more time to arrange a deal, but to cover in the event of a deal being agreed. It would be called an implementation period, of course, but it would be an extension. After all, the transition period was supposed to be an implementation period itself. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.